The snow falls soft on the Scottish Highlands. February 13th, 1692. Dawn breaks cold over Glencoe. In the valley below, smoke rises from chimneys. The MacDonalds sleep in their homes. They have given shelter to soldiers for 12 nights. Shelter, food, warmth, the ancient law of hospitality. Sacred, unbreakable. At 5 in the morning, the soldiers receive their orders. Written, signed. Sealed by men in distant castles who will never see what happens next. The fires they've warmed themselves by become pyres. The doors they've entered as guests become traps. By dawn, 38 people are dead. Women, children, the elderly, shot in their beds, burned in their homes, hunted through the snow. This is not just a massacre. This is betrayal written into stone. And the castle that planned at Glencoe House, later rebuilt as the monument we see today, still stands, beautiful, remonte, haunted by what was ordered from its walls. This is the dark story of Scotland's most cursed castle, the place where hospitality died, where trust was murdered, where blood soaked into Highland snow and never washed away. Scotland's landscape is written in stone and blood. Castles rise from cliffs and moors like broken teeth. Some were built for defense, some for power, some to control a rebellious people who refused to kneel. Glencoe House sits in the shadow of mountains that have seen everything. Clan wars, English invasion, the slow death of the Highland way of life. But no building in Scotland carries a stain quite like this one, because what happened here in 1692 was not warfare, it was not battle, it was something colder. Something calculated, something that violated every code the Highlands held sacred. The massacre of Glencoe was ordered by men in Edinburgh and London, planned in government chambers, executed by soldiers who had eaten at MacDonald tables and slept by MacDonald fires. 13 days of hospitality repaid with murder before dawn. The death toll was 38. But the real number, those who fled into the February mountains and froze in the snow, was much higher. The betrayal was total, and Scotland never forgot. Glencoe House, the seat of power that gave the orders, would be rebuilt after fire destroyed the original. The new structure rose in the 18th and 19th centuries, elegant, refined, a monument to Highland romanticism. But underneath the Victorian additions and the carefully landscaped grounds lies the same foundation, the same stones that once housed the men who signed the death warrants. This is not a story about architecture for architecture's sake. This is about what buildings witness, what they enable, what they cannot wash away no matter how many times they are rebuilt or repurposed or opened to tourists who come to admire the views. The massacre at Glencoe was political. It was about control, about forcing Highland clans to submit to a distant crown, about making an example so brutal that no one would dare resist again. It worked, and it failed, because Scotland remembered the names of the dead, the names of the men who gave the orders, the cold arithmetic of state-sponsored murder. Glencoe House stands today as both monument and warning. Walk its halls and you walk where men debated how many deaths would send the right message. Stand in its rooms and you stand where orders were written that turned hospitality into a death sentence. The Highlands are full of ghosts, but some haunt more loudly than others. This is the dark story of Glencoe House, the castle that planned a massacre, the place where the rules of civilization broke. And the question that still hangs in the cold Highland air: what do you do with a building that cannot escape its past? The mountains close in like walls, Glencoe the glen of weeping cuts through the western Highlands of Scotland, like a wound. Steep slopes rise on either side. Waterfalls spill down black rock. In winter, snow chokes the high passes. In summer, mist rolls through the valley floor thick enough to hide an army. This is not just scenery. This is a landscape built for ambush, for defense, for control. The MacDonald clan held this glen for generations. They knew every path, every ridge, every place where a man could hide or a retreat could be cut off. The geography protected them, until it didn't. Until geography became a trap, and the soldiers who came as guests knew exactly where the exits were. Stand at the mouth of Glencoe today and you feel it immediately. The valley runs roughly east to west for about 10 miles. The mountains on either side, Bidi and Nam Burn to the south, the Ionak Egach Ridge to the north rise sharp and sudden. These are not gentle hills. They are jagged peaks that climb to over 3,000 feet. In February, their summits disappear into cloud. Snow clings to slopes too steep for trees. The rock itself is volcanic, ancient, black in places, rust red in others where iron bleeds through the stone. The river Co runs through the valley floor, fed by dozens of tributaries that pour down from the heights. In winter, these streams freeze and thaw, making the ground treacherous. The path along the valley follows the river. There is no other easy route. To the north and south, the ridges are impassable for anyone who does not know them intimately. Tracks exist, hidden routes that shepherds and clansmen used, but they require local knowledge. They require growing up in this place. The MacDonalds understood this advantage. For generations, they had used Glencoe as both home and fortress. When enemies approached, they could retreat into the high ground. When they raided neighboring clans, and raiding was part of Highland life, not banditry but a recognized means of acquiring cattle and asserting power, they used the narrow passes to move unseen. The glen was a natural stronghold, difficult to attack, easy to defend, or so it seemed. But geography that protects can also imprison. There are only two ways out of Glencoe: east toward Loch Leven and the route to Fort William, west toward the coast and the lands of other clans. Both exits can be blocked. Both were on the morning of February 13th, 1692. The soldiers who came to Glencoe in early February did not arrive blind. They had maps, they had orders, and they had 13 days to study the terrain while pretending to be grateful guests. They learned where the MacDonald homes clustered. They noted which paths led to the high passes. They marked the distances, the angles, the points where a retreat could be cut off. When the killing began before dawn, troops moved into position at both ends of the valley. The plan was simple and brutal: block the exits, drive the MacDonalds into the mountains in the middle of winter. Let the cold finish what the muskets started. The geography that had protected the clan for centuries became a killing ground. The mountains that had been refuge turned into walls of a trap. The valley itself remembers. The name itself, Glencoe, derives from older Gaelic. Some say it means Glen of Weeping. Others argue it comes from the River Co, whose name might mean narrow. Either translation fits. This is a place of sorrow. And it is a place where options narrow until there is nowhere left to run. To understand what happened at Glencoe, you have to understand what a clan meant. Not a family in the modern sense. A kinship network that stretched across generations. A system where loyalty flowed upward to the chief and protection flowed down to the lowest clansman. Where identity was collective. Where hospitality was not kindness but law. The MacDonalds of Glencoe were one branch of a sprawling clan. Not the richest, not the most powerful, but proud, fiercely independent, resistant to authority they had not chosen. They lived by raiding and cattle herding. They fought when they had to. They survived in a landscape that killed the weak. And they obeyed one rule above all others. Once you gave shelter, once you broke bread with a guest, that person was under your protection. To betray that was unthinkable. It was the code that held Highland society together. The word clan comes from the Gaelic clan, meaning children. Everyone within the clan shared or claimed to share descent from a common ancestor. Blood ties were sacred. But clan membership was flexible. Fosterage was common. Outsiders could be adopted through marriage or service. What mattered was not strictly biology but belonging, loyalty, the willingness to fight and die for the collective. At the top sat the chief. In Glencoe, this was Alistair Mac Ian. He was not merely a landlord. He was a father figure to the entire community. He settled disputes. He led raids. He represented the clan to distant authorities in Edinburgh and London who claimed jurisdiction over lands they poorly understood. Beneath the chief came the tacksmen, lesser gentry who organized the fighting men. Below them, common clansmen, farmers, herders, craftsmen. But even the poorest clansman had dignity within the system. He had protection, and he had obligations. When the chief called, you came. When the clan fought, you fought. When a guest arrived, you shared what you had. Clan life was hard. Winters were brutal. Food could be scarce. Violence was frequent. Raids on neighboring clans were expected, and retaliation was guaranteed. Blood feuds ran for generations. A killing in one decade might be avenged in the next. Honor had to be defended. Insults had to be answered. Weakness invited destruction. Yet hospitality stood above all disputes. This was not charity. It was sacred obligation rooted in survival. In the Highlands, where distances were vast and shelter scarce, refusing a traveler could mean sentencing them to death. So the law of hospitality became absolute. Once someone entered your home and ate your food, you owed them protection. Even an enemy, even someone you had fought the day before. This code was older than Christianity in Scotland. It was woven into Gaelic poetry and song. The worst insult you could level at a Highlander was to call him inhospitable. It meant he was not civilized, not human, not worthy of his place in the clan. The MacDonalds of Glencoe lived by this code without question. When Captain Campbell and his soldiers arrived in February 1692 asking for shelter, refusing would have been unthinkable. Campbell was a Campbell A clan the MacDonalds had fought many times. It made no difference. He came in peace. He was given roofs, food, warmth. For 13 days the laws of hospitality held, and then they were shattered in a way Scotland had never seen before. In 1603, James Fitzy of Scotland became James I of England. 2 kingdoms, 1 king. The union of crowns was supposed to bring peace. Instead, it brought a century of religious war, political betrayal, and the slow grinding destruction of Highland independence. By 1688, another crisis arrived. The Catholic King James II was overthrown in the Glorious Revolution. William of Orange, a Protestant, took the throne. Most of Scotland's lowland elites supported him. But the Highland clans, they were divided. Some backed William. Others stayed loyal to James. The MacDonalds of Glencoe were Jacobite supporters of the deposed king. They fought at the Battle of Killiecrankie. They lost. And when William's government demanded that all clan chiefs swear an oath of allegiance by January 1st, 1692, the MacDonalds hesitated. The union of the crowns changed everything and nothing. James Fitzy inherited the English throne when Elizabeth I died childless. Suddenly, the Scottish king ruled both nations. He moved his court to London. Scotland became the secondary kingdom. Political power drained south. Decisions about Scotland were increasingly made by men who had never seen the Highlands and had no interest in understanding them. For the clans, this shift meant dealing with a more distant and hostile authority. English administrators saw Highland culture as backward, chaotic, a problem to be managed or eliminated. The clan system with its private armies and blood loyalties looked like a threat to centralized royal power. The Gaelic language was dismissed as barbaric. The faith of many clans clashed with the Presbyterian lowlands and Protestant English establishment. Religious conflict tore through Scotland for decades. The National Covenant of 1638 rejected English interference in Scottish church governance. Civil war followed. Clans fought on both sides. The MacDonalds backed the Royalists, winning brutal victories before eventual defeat. When the monarchy was restored in 1660, old wounds reopened rather than healed. By 1688, the crisis came to a head. James II, a Catholic, faced rebellion from Protestant England. William of Orange, his son-in-law, and a Dutch Protestant prince, was invited to take the throne. James fled to France. The Glorious Revolution was bloodless in England. In Scotland, it meant war. Most lowland Scots accepted William quickly. The Kirk backed him enthusiastically. But the Highlands split. Some clans saw William as the winning side and swore loyalty early. Others refused. They were Jacobites, from Jacobus, Latin for James. They believed in the divine right of kings and saw William as a usurper. The MacDonalds of Glencoe were among the Jacobites. When Viscount Dundee raised the Stuart standard in 1689, they joined him. The Battle of Killiecrankie in July was a Highland victory. Dundee's forces smashed a government army, but Dundee himself was killed. Without his leadership, the Jacobite cause collapsed. The clans drifted home, defeated but not destroyed. William's government faced a problem. The Highlands remained unstable, full of armed clans who had just fought against the crown. A political solution was needed. In August 1691, the government issued a proclamation. All clan chiefs had to swear an oath of allegiance to King William by January 1st, 1692. Those who refused would be treated as traitors. Their lands would be forfeit. Their clans could be destroyed. Most chiefs swore the oath quickly. It was pragmatic. The war was lost. William controlled the government and the army. Resistance meant annihilation. But Alistair MacIan of Glencoe waited. He was in his 70s. He had fought for the Stuarts his entire life. Swearing loyalty to William felt like betrayal. The question was not whether to swear, but when and how to extract the best terms possible while doing so. The deadline was clear. Every Highland chief had to appear before a magistrate and swear loyalty to King William by January 1st, 1692. Miss the deadline, and there would be consequences. Alistair MacIan, chief of the MacDonalds of Glencoe, waited until the last moment. He was old. He was stubborn. He did not trust lowland authorities, and he knew that swearing the oath meant betraying everything his clan had fought for. On December 31st, he finally travelled to Fort William to take the oath, but the magistrate there had no authority to administer it. MacIan was sent to Inverary, 60 miles away through winter mountains. He arrived on January 6th, 5 days late. The oath was taken, witnessed, recorded. It should have been enough. But in Edinburgh, men were already writing different orders. Orders that had nothing to do with oaths or loyalty. Orders about making examples. MacIan left Glencoe on the last day of December. The journey to Fort William took most of the day through snow and frozen ground. He was 70 years old, moving through a landscape that could kill a younger man. He brought a small party, not an army. A chief travelling to perform a legal duty. At Fort William, he met Colonel John Hill, the garrison commander. Hill understood Highland ways better than most government officials. MacIan explained he had come to swear the oath. Hill's response must have felt like a blow. He had no authority to administer it. Only a civil magistrate could. The nearest was Sir Colin Campbell, Sheriff of Argyll, 60 miles south in Inverary. MacIan had no choice. He turned south, 60 miles through the Highlands in January, through mountain passes where snow could trap travellers for days, through territory held by Campbells, traditional enemies of the MacDonalds. It took nearly a week. He arrived in Inverary on January 6th, 5 days past the deadline. He found Sir Colin Campbell and asked to swear the oath immediately. Campbell hesitated. The deadline had passed. Taking the oath now might not protect MacIan or his clan. But MacIan pleaded. He explained the delay. He had gone to Fort William in good faith. He had been sent onward through winter mountains. Campbell relented. On January 6th, Alistair MacIan swore the oath of allegiance to King William. The words were spoken. Witnesses recorded them. Campbell signed the document and sent it to Edinburgh with a letter explaining the delay. By Highland honour, MacIan had fulfilled his obligation. He had bent his pride. He had travelled through brutal conditions to swear loyalty to a king he did not believe in. The oath should have saved his clan. But in Edinburgh, Sir John Dalrymple, Master of Stair and Secretary of State for Scotland, had already decided the MacDonalds would be made an example. The missed deadline was convenient. It provided legal cover. But even if MacIan had sworn on time, the outcome might not have changed. Dalrymple wanted blood. He wanted a demonstration that would terrify every clan into submission. The MacDonalds were perfect targets. Small enough to be destroyed, Jacobite enough to be hated, remote enough that the killing could be controlled. When Campbell's letter arrived explaining MacIan had taken the oath late, but in good faith, Dalrymple buried it. He did not forward it to London. Instead, he drafted orders for Fort William, orders that turned guests into executioners and hospitality into a death sentence. The letters that sealed Glencoe's fate were written in careful bureaucratic language. No screaming, no rage, just cold administrative efficiency. Sir John Dalrymple, Master of Stair and Scotland's Secretary of State, saw an opportunity. The MacDonalds were late. They were Jacobites. They were vulnerable. And they lived in a place remote enough that what happened there could be contained, spun, blamed on the chaos of war. The orders were explicit. The garrison at Fort William, under Captain Robert Campbell of Glenlyon, was to be billeted with the MacDonalds. They were to stay for 2 weeks, gain their trust, and then, on the night of February 13th, they were to kill every MacDonald under 70, burn the houses, seize the livestock, leave no one alive who could carry a weapon or bear a child who might grow into one. This was not war. This was extermination dressed up as law enforcement. Sir John Dalrymple was a bureaucrat, a lawyer who understood that power worked best when wrapped in legal language. He had been appointed Secretary of State for Scotland in 1691. His job was to bring the Highlands under control. The oath of allegiance had been his idea. When reports arrived that most chiefs had sworn but a few were late, Dalrymple saw his chance. He wrote to Colonel Hill at Fort William on January 11, 1692. The letter survives. He notes that Mac-Ian was late. Then he writes something chilling. "I am glad that Glencoe did not come in within the time prescribed." Glad, not disappointed. Glad. Because lateness gave him legal cover for what he wanted, a demonstration so brutal it would break Highland resistance permanently. The orders were precise. Campbell's company was to march to Glencoe and request quarters, be received as friendly troops, stay at least a week, long enough to be accepted as guests, then kill every MacDonald they could find. The age limit was specific. No one under 70 was to be spared. This was not about punishing warriors. It was about destroying a clan entirely. Kill the men. Kill the boys who would grow into fighters. Kill the women who could bear children. The elderly over 70 could live not from mercy, but because they posed no threat. Dalrymple wrote that the work must be done secretly and suddenly. The MacDonalds must not escape. He wanted the clan erased, and he wanted it done in a way that would terrify every other Jacobite chief. The orders travelled from Edinburgh to Fort William, sealed with wax. Colonel Hill received them and must have felt sick. Hill had spent years managing clans through negotiation. He knew the MacDonalds. He had met Mac-Ian when the old chief came trying to swear the oath. But orders were orders. Hill could object. He could delay. But he could not refuse. King William's government had spoken. To disobey would be treason. Hill passed the orders to Captain Robert Campbell of Glenlyon. Campbell was a Campbell by blood and a broken man by circumstance. He had lost money, land, status. Military service was one of his few remaining options. When told to accept MacDonald hospitality before killing them, he agreed. On February 1st, 1692, Campbell and 120 soldiers marched into Glencoe and asked for shelter. The MacDonalds, bound by ancient laws, opened their doors. Captain Robert Campbell arrived in Glencoe on February 1st with 120 soldiers. He was a Campbell traditional enemies of the MacDonalds, but he came under a flag of peace. He said the garrison needed shelter while on patrol. Alistair Mac-Ian welcomed them, gave them roofs, gave them food. For 13 days the soldiers ate MacDonald bread, drank MacDonald whiskey, played cards with MacDonald men, and slept by MacDonald fires. Campbell himself stayed in the chief's home. He dined at Mac-Ian's table. On the night of February 12th, he accepted an invitation to dinner the following evening. He smiled. He thanked his hosts. And at 5 o'clock the next morning he gave the order to kill them all. His own nephew married to a MacDonald woman. His men who had shared warmth and stories with their hosts. None of it mattered. Orders were orders. When Campbell's troops appeared, the MacDonalds saw them from miles away, a company of soldiers, armed, led by a Campbell. The history between the clans was bloody. Campbells and MacDonalds had raided each other for generations. But Campbell came asking for quarters, not battle. Troops needed shelter in winter. Fort William was overcrowded. It made sense that soldiers might billet there temporarily. Mac Ian had little choice. Refusing hospitality could be seen as defiance. The clan had just sworn the oath. Turning away the king's troops could undo that peace. And there was the law, Highland law. Once someone asked for shelter, you gave it, even an enemy. The soldiers were divided among homes through the glen. Campbells stayed in the chief's house, lower ranks billeted with tacksmen and common families. Each household took in a few men, fed them, gave them beds or floor space by the fire. For 13 days, a strange routine settled in. Soldiers and MacDonalds lived side by side. The men played cards, they shared tobacco, they told stories. The soldiers drank whiskey provided by their hosts. They warmed themselves by fires that MacDonald women tended. Campbell dined with Mac Ian repeatedly. They sat at the same table. What they talked about, the records do not say. Campbell was 56, Mac Ian was 70. Both were men shaped by violence. Campbell's nephew visited his MacDonald in-laws. He ate with his wife's family. He played with children who called him uncle. He must have known what was coming. The orders had been delivered before the troops left Fort William. On February 12th, Campbell accepted an invitation to dine with Mac Ian the following day. He smiled. He expressed gratitude. He gave no sign anything was wrong. That night, he gathered his officers and told them what would happen at dawn. The soldiers were informed quietly. No large assembly. Just whispered orders passed down the chain. At 5 in the morning, they would rise, arm themselves, kill every MacDonald in reach, under 70. Everyone younger was a target, men, women, children. Some soldiers must have hesitated. These were the people who had fed them, whose fires they had shared, but discipline held. The army ran on obedience. You did not question orders. Campbell spent the night in Mac Ian's house. He slept under the chief's roof. He ate the chief's food. He accepted the chief's trust. And at 5 in the morning, as snow fell outside and darkness still held the glen, he gave the signal. The massacre began. The signal came before dawn. February 13th, 5 in the morning. Still dark, snow falling. The soldiers moved quietly. They went to the homes where they had been guests. They knocked, or they did not bother knocking. Alistair Mac Ian, 70 years old, was shot in the back while getting out of bed. His wife was stripped of her clothing and left to die of exposure. She died the next day. In other homes, men were shot as they answered their doors. Children were dragged from beds. Some families fought back, some ran. The soldiers had been ordered to block the exits from the glen both ends, sealed by troops moving into position at 4 in the morning. But the plan failed. Most of the MacDonalds escaped into the mountains, not because they were warriors, because they knew the land. They scattered into snow and darkness while the soldiers burned their homes behind them. The killing began in Mac Ian's house. Campbell's men entered where the old chief slept. He woke to boots on floorboards. Before he could speak, muskets fired. He was hit in the back. He fell forward. His wife screamed. The soldiers dragged her from bed. They stripped rings from her fingers with their teeth. They tore her clothes away. Left her naked in February cold. She lasted until morning. In the tacksman's house, 9 men were killed, shot in their beds or as they stumbled toward doors. The soldiers worked methodically, room to room. At another home, Archibald MacDonald was playing cards with soldiers when the order came. The men he had been laughing with stood, raised their muskets, and shot him where he sat. The cards were still in his hand. Some families had warning. A few soldiers broke ranks. One reportedly whispered to a boy to run. Another hesitated long enough that a family fled. Acts of individual conscience in organized murder. But they were exceptions. The escape began immediately. The MacDonalds were not professional warriors. They were farmers, herders. What saved them was geography. They knew every path, every hidden track. When the shooting started, families ran, not toward the exits, but up, into the mountains. Through snow that would kill them slowly instead of muskets that would kill them fast. The plan to seal the glen required coordination. Troops were supposed to move into position at both ends by 4 in the morning. The eastern contingent arrived late. By the time they reached position, MacDonalds were already streaming past into the wilderness. The western bloc was more effective, but gaps existed. The mountains were riddled with tracks, shepherds' paths, deer trails, routes only locals knew. Behind them, soldiers set fires. Thatched roofs caught quickly. Wooden beams cracked and collapsed. Food stores went up in smoke. Livestock was shot or driven off. Destroy everything. By sunrise, 2 hours after the killing began, the glen was in flames. Bodies lay in the snow. Blood darkened the ground, and hundreds of MacDonalds were scattered across the mountains, climbing higher, moving away from smoke and screams, carrying children, helping the elderly, knowing every step took them farther from shelter and closer to death by cold. 38 were confirmed dead by violence, but the real killing had only just begun. 38 dead by direct violence. But the killing did not stop at dawn. Families fled into the mountains in nightclothes. No food, no shelter. February in the Highlands is lethal. Temperatures drop below freezing. Wind cuts through wool. Snow blinds. The passers were choked. How many froze in the hills is unknown. Estimates range from 40 to over 100. Women, children, elderly who could not keep pace. They died slowly. Hypothermia, exhaustion, starvation. The soldiers had burned the food stores, killed the livestock, left nothing. Those who survived reached other clan stewards, Camerons who took them in and hid them. But entire family lines were erased in a single night. The MacDonalds who escaped ran with whatever they were wearing. Some had grabbed Plaid's heavy woolen cloaks. Most had only shirts and loose trousers. Children were barefoot. Mothers carried infants wrapped in whatever fabric they could snatch. The temperature was well below freezing. Historians estimate between 10 and 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind chill dropped it further. Exposed skin freezes in minutes. The families climbed. The soldiers held the valley floor. The only escape was up into the ridges and over the passes. These were summer routes. In February, those paths were buried under snow. Ice made rocks treacherous. Darkness made navigation nearly impossible. Hypothermia begins with shivering. The body tries to generate heat. Then comes confusion, disorientation. People make irrational decisions, removing clothing, wandering from the group. Children are especially vulnerable. Their smaller bodies lose heat faster. The very young and very old go first. The elderly could not keep pace. Some families tried to carry them. But carrying an adult through waist-deep snow up a mountainside in darkness is nearly impossible. Terrible decisions had to be made. Some elderly MacDonalds told their families to leave them, to save the children. They sat down in the snow and waited. Women who had just given birth could not run. One account describes a woman who gave birth on the mountain. The baby died within hours. The mother survived only because her family refused to leave her. Infants died in their mother's arms. The cold took them quietly. No screams, just stillness. Mothers kept walking, carrying bodies, refusing to believe they were gone. Starvation compounded the cold. The MacDonalds had not eaten since the night before. Their bodies had no fuel to generate heat. By the second day, anyone still on the mountain was running on empty. Hunger makes you weak. Weakness makes you slow. Slowness makes you cold. Some families reached neighboring clans within a day. The Stewarts of Appin took in refugees. The Camerons did the same. These clans risked retaliation by harboring fugitives. But Highland law held. Others wandered for days. By the time they stumbled into a Cameron village, they were frostbitten, starving, traumatized. Some had lost fingers or toes. Some never recovered. The true death toll will never be known. 38 bodies were counted in the glen. But how many died on the mountain? The snow buried them. Spring thaw revealed some. Others were never found. News of the massacre spread slowly. The government in Edinburgh tried to control the narrative. They called it a legitimate military action against rebels who had missed the deadline for the oath. They claimed the MacDonalds had been traitors, but Scotland was small. Word travelled. Survivors told their stories. Other clans heard what had happened under the law of hospitality and recoiled in horror. By 1693, pressure mounted for an investigation. An inquiry was held, evidence was presented, witnesses testified. The conclusion was damning. The massacre was murder, premeditated, ordered from the top. But punishment? Almost none. Sir John Dalrymple resigned but kept his lands and titles. Captain Campbell was never tried. A few soldiers were briefly imprisoned. The Crown issued a vague statement of regret, and that was all. The message was clear. You could order mass murder in Scotland and walk away if you had the right connections. The first reports reached Edinburgh within days. Military dispatches confirmed the operation had been carried out. Objectives achieved. Resistance eliminated. No mention of hospitality violated or children shot. But refugees were talking. MacDonalds who reached neighboring villages told what happened. The soldiers had lived with them for 13 days, eaten their food, then killed them at dawn. Even clans with no love for the MacDonalds were horrified. Highland culture had many codes. Raiding was acceptable. Blood feuds were understood. Open warfare was expected, but hospitality was sacred, absolute. What Campbell had done, what Dalrymple had ordered, shattered something fundamental. The government tried to frame it as justice. The MacDonalds had been late swearing the oath. They were rebels. The king's forces had acted within authority. It was legal. It was necessary. Scotland was not convinced. Pamphlets circulated. Poems were written. Preachers spoke from pulpits. By late 1692, the massacre had become a scandal the government could not ignore. King William ordered an inquiry in 1695. The commission gathered testimony. Survivors described the killings. Soldiers admitted what they had done. Letters from Dalrymple showed orders had come from the top. The report was unambiguous. This was murder under trust, the worst crime in Highland law. The report named names. Dalrymple had planned it. Hill had passed the orders. Campbell had executed them. The commission recommended prosecution. Nothing happened. For months, the report sat. Finally, in 1696, limited action was taken. Dalrymple resigned as Secretary of State. But he kept his lands, his title, his wealth. He was not charged. He simply stepped back from public office. Campbell was never brought to trial. He continued his military service, lived quietly, died years later without facing justice. A handful of soldiers were briefly imprisoned, the lowest ranks. The men who had pulled triggers on orders from above. They served short sentences and were released. King William issued a letter expressing regret. The language was vague. He did not name those responsible. He did not order reparations. He offered words and nothing more. The message to Scotland was clear. Highland lives were cheap. Highland law did not matter. If you had position and connections, you would not be punished. The system protected its own. Glencoe housed the seat of local power. The place where orders were received and soldiers were billeted did not survive the 17th century intact. Fires, raids, and time took the original structure, but the site remained. In the 18th and 19th centuries, as the Highlands were pacified and romanticized, a new house rose. Elegant, neo-Gothic, turrets and gardens. A monument to Highland tradition reimagined for tourists and nostalgic lowlanders who wanted Scotland's past sanitized and picturesque. The new Glencoe house erased nothing. The land remembered. Every stone laid on that ground was laid over the memory of betrayal. Visitors came to admire the views. They walked paths where soldiers had marched. They marveled at the mountains that had hidden the fleeing, and most of them had no idea what had happened there. Or they knew the sanitized version, a tragic misunderstanding, a regrettable accident of history. The original Glencoe house was not grand. It was a fortified residence built for function. Stone walls thick enough to withstand attack, small windows. A defensive position overlooking the glen. This was where local authority resided, where military orders were received and passed down. After the massacre, the building fell into disuse. The association poisoned it. No one wanted to live there. Fire damaged it in the early 1700s. Whether accidental or deliberate, records do not say. By the mid-18th century, it was largely ruins. But the site did not stay empty. The Highlands changed. The clan system was systematically destroyed after the Jacobite risings of 1715 and 1745. The British government banned tartans, Highland dress, weapons. Clan chiefs became landlords. Warrior culture was replaced with sheep farming and emigration. By the 19th century, a strange transformation occurred. The Highlands that had been barbaric were now romantic. Writers like Sir Walter Scott reimagined Highland history as noble and tragic. Tourists came to see the mountains, the glens, the ruins. Queen Victoria fell in love with the Highlands and built Balmoral. Glencoe became part of this tourist circuit. The dramatic landscape was irresistible. The story of the massacre added tragic romance. Visitors wanted to see where it had happened. A new Glencoe house was built in the late 18th century and expanded in the 19th. The architecture was neo-Gothic, echoing medieval castles but softened for comfort. Turrets and battlements that served no military purpose. Gardens laid out in picturesque style. Views framed to maximize drama. The new house appealed to Victorian sensibilities. It looked old without being uncomfortable. It evoked Highland tradition without the violence, heritage as performance, history as decoration. Visitors came. They walked the glen. Guides told them about the massacre, but the story was softened. A tragedy, a betrayal, but distant, historical. Something that had happened long ago to people who were now romantic figures rather than real human beings who had bled in the snow. The land itself resisted sanitizing. The mountains had not changed. The paths the MacDonalds used were still there. The stones where bodies fell were still cold in winter. You could not erase what happened by building a prettier house. Local people remembered. Stories passed down through families. The massacre became part of Scottish identity, a symbol of English betrayal and Highland suffering. Scotland did not forget. The massacre of Glencoe entered national consciousness as the defining betrayal. Songs were written, poems composed. In the 19th century, as Scotland's identity was being reconstructed under British rule, Glencoe became a rallying cry. Not for rebellion that time had passed, but for memory. For insisting that some wounds do not heal, that some crimes remain crimes no matter how much time passes or how many apologies are issued. The MacDonalds never regained their full strength. The clans scattered. Some branches thrived elsewhere. But Glencoe itself remained haunted. Literally, according to locals. Stories of ghosts in the glen. Figures seen walking the snow at dawn. Voices calling out in the mist. Whether you believe in hauntings or not, the psychological truth is undeniable. This place cannot escape what happened here. The first songs appeared within years of the massacre. Gaelic laments sung by survivors and their descendants. These were not written down initially. They were passed orally, sung at gatherings, performed at funerals. The melodies were mournful. The lyrics detailed the betrayal, the names of the dead, the violation of hospitality. By the 18th century, lowland poets began writing about Glencoe in English. The massacre became literary. It appeared in ballads and histories. Writers used it to illustrate Highland suffering under British rule. The story was adapted, sometimes romanticized, but the core remained. Trust broken, blood spilled, justice denied. In the 19th century, as Scottish nationalism grew, Glencoe became a symbol. Scotland had lost its independence in 1707 with the Act of Union. The Highlands had been crushed after Culloden in 1746. By the 1800s, Scotland existed as part of Britain, its distinct identity under pressure. Glencoe became a way to assert that identity. We remember what was done to us. We have not forgotten. The massacre appeared in novels. Sir Walter Scott referenced it. The story entered schoolbooks. Scottish children learned about the betrayal as part of their history. It became foundational. A story every Scot knew. The MacDonalds who survived rebuilt slowly. Some returned to Glencoe after the danger passed. Others settled with relatives in Cameron or Stuart territories. The clan never recovered its pre-massacre strength. Too many had died. Too many family lines had been erased. Glencoe itself remained MacDonald land, but thinly populated. Farming was hard. The soil was poor. The weather brutal. Those who stayed did so out of stubbornness or lack of options. The Glen became a place of memory more than a thriving community, and the stories of hauntings began. Locals reported seeing figures in the snow at dawn, shapes that walked the paths the fleeing had taken, voices heard in the mist, lights in the ruins of burned houses. Whether these were genuine supernatural experiences or trauma expressing itself as folklore, the effect was the same. Glencoe was haunted. Visitors reported unease, a heaviness in the air, a sense of being watched. The place carried its past visibly. The psychological truth is harder to dismiss. Trauma embeds itself in places, not through ghosts, but through memory, through stories told and retold, through the landscape itself, unchanged, still bearing the marks of what happened. Scotland kept Glencoe alive in collective memory, not as entertainment, not as nostalgia, but as evidence. Proof that betrayal had consequences, that some acts could not be justified or forgiven, that Highland culture had codes that mattered, and when those codes were broken, the breaking left scars. Today, Glencoe is a tourist destination. Hikers walk the trails, climbers scale the peaks, the landscapes are photographed and shared on social media, dramatic, windswept, achingly beautiful. The National Trust for Scotland maintains a visitor centre. It tells the story, honestly mostly. The massacre is explained, the victims named, the politics laid out. But Glencoe House itself stands separate, privately owned, partially ruined, rebuilt and altered so many times that the original structure is almost invisible. Yet the land holds the memory. The mountains do not forget. And anyone who walks the glen at dawn in February, when the snow falls and the wind cuts cold, can feel it. The weight of what was done here, the betrayal that broke something fundamental in Highland society, the knowledge that beauty and horror can occupy the same ground, that a place can be both stunning and cursed, that some stories refuse to be buried. The visitor centre opened in 2002, modern and unobtrusive. Inside, exhibits explain the clan system, the political context, the events of February 13th. Touchscreens let visitors explore timelines. Audio recordings play survivors' accounts. A wall lists the names of the confirmed dead. The presentation is careful. It does not romanticize or simplify. It acknowledges complexity, that Highland culture was violent, that the massacre happened within broader political struggle. But it also states clearly, this was murder. This was betrayal. Thousands pass through each year. Some are Scottish, seeing a place central to their national story. Others are international tourists drawn by landscape. Many have watched films shot here. Hikers follow marked trails into the mountains. In summer, the glen is crowded. In winter, only serious climbers come. The routes the MacDonalds took when they fled are still there, unmarked, harder. Most tourists never see them. Shepherds' paths steep and narrow. Local guides sometimes point them out, explain how families climbed in darkness, barefoot, carrying children. Glencoe House stands a few miles away, privately owned. Not open to the public, the current structure is a patchwork. Parts date to the 18th century. Parts are Victorian. The original building is mostly gone. The site overlooks the glen. The views are the same soldiers had in 1692. The mountains framing the valley, the narrow passes. Locals still tell stories. Families trace lineage to survivors. People claim to have seen things, figures in the mist, sounds that do not match wind. Most are skeptical of literal ghosts, but all acknowledge the atmosphere. In February, on the anniversary, a few gather. Not formal ceremony, just individuals who feel the day matters. They stand in the cold. Some leave flowers, some say prayers, some just stand silent. The land remains what it has always been. Beautiful, harsh, unforgiving. The meaning is heavy. Betrayal, murder, survival, memory. Glencoe will never be just scenery. It is evidence, a wound that healed badly, a place where beauty and horror are inseparable. The mountains do not forget, and neither does Scotland.